In this lecture, I'm going to talk about the view that the city mainly acts as a growth machine. So this is going to be a claim about what cities actually do. And most of this comes from a rather famous paper written by Harvey Mulich in 1976. And in this paper, he advances the view that, for the most part, cities act to increase economic growth. So essentially, there are certain coalitions, and I'll talk about this in a second, that come together, and they decide what to do in the city. And the ones that are dominant within cities, he claims, are those which are growth-centric. So this is, this should be compared to the standard model, which most people, have, and which is still common today, that the interests of voters, or the preferences of voters, or something about the voters themselves, all of the voters, are what guide politics. So, Mullich's claim is a descriptive one. So, and he says this is bad, that this is what actually happens. So you can think that the voters' interests should guide city decision making, and yet it doesn't. And so the latter is a normative claim, and what Mullich is making is a descriptive claim, because he's a sociologist. So yeah, as I said, he criticizes this, and at first it's unclear why one would criticize growth, and that's most of the work in the paper. So what he has to show is that growth isn't good for everyone. So it could be that it's true that growth really guides cities, but growth is always in the voters' interests. That's possible. But what he's saying is that there's a number of indicators that show that really growth is not in the interests of many people in the city. In fact, they're not in the interest of most people in the city. So he thinks that growth advances an elite and disadvantages most people. So I'll cover this little in a little bit more detail in a second. But he basically thinks that unemployment is not affected by growth, even though it seems like it should be, and that externalities actually make things worse for people living in cities. And externalities, if you don't know this, are things that are a consequence of economic activity that is external to the sort of cost structure of that economic activity. So imagine a factory is producing a lot of water pollution, and just dumps stuff in a river. Imagine that the owners of the factory don't actually incur any cost by putting anything into the river. That cost is external to their economic decisions, to their the costs of their product and such, and so that's an externality. So what Mullich thinks is growth pushes externality costs onto those outside of this elite. So first we have to discuss what are interest groups and coalitions. So Mullich views these as the basic building blocks of urban and civic power structure. And so basically there's different interests. So there's different people in a city, and they have different ends, they have different interests, and they generally form groups of full of people who have similar interests. So these can include business interests, property owners have interests, environmentalists have interests, social welfare activists have interests, right? So they all want certain things for the city, and their interests diverge from each other and are more similar to those within their group. So what he thinks happens is these interest groups join together at various levels in the city government, and they compete for resources. And that's basically what civic politics is like. So politics, in his view, is this competition So there's competition within a city, between certain parts to get these resources, and competition between cities to get these resources. So what he thinks happens is those coalitions based on property are dominate other interests. So basically the business interests, property owners, people, interests like that, groups like that, dominate other interests like environmentalists and social welfare activists who are not, their interests are not based upon property. So the reasons for this are a few, and it's pretty intuitive why this might be. So first, the government really requires property owners. As I said in my last lecture, property is very important, and the tax you can derive from it, the tax you can force people to pay for possessing the property within a city, is important to fill the coffers of the city. And without those property owners, and with lower property rates, you get less tax revenue. And so property is very important for tax revenue. And also, political campaigning itself, so the sort of way people become elected is really dependent upon the money which is formed by these property owners. And without this, people can't, so politicians cannot be successful. They cannot come to office. And so that's a strong claim. So we'll have to see whether, this has been a problem lately with the Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court. Many people think that money is having too much influence in politics. But others think that money really doesn't have much influence at all, that, really the politicians who get most of the money are the ones who are going to win anyway for other reasons, right? And people are giving them money because they assume they're going to win, because you want to give money to the winner. So, there's a lack of understanding of what the causation is there, and so this is going to be controversial. But it should make us pause. So it seems like business interests, property owners, people who possess things, have property within a city, do have this influence through money, perhaps. And finally, and this is a little less specified, he thinks that property forms the basis for the we feeling. So the fact that two people feel some sort of connection with each other, right? They live in the same sort of area. Go to the same. Their kids go to the same schools. They feel like their destiny is linked together in a way, right? So bad stuff happening to one is also going to hurt the other. These sort of things, which he calls we feelings, so the fact that we feel like a group and we need to stick together, are linked to property interests and not linked as strongly to other interests. So, two social welfare activists in different parts of the city or different cities might feel less connection with each other, might feel less bound, to each other, in this way of that their destinies are bound, than people who live in proximity to each other, who just happen to live in the same neighborhood. So even though these two property owners might have different interests slightly, they still have this we feeling because they live near each other. So because of this, the we feeling, he thinks, allows these groups to form powerful coalitions. So these other things as well. But the fact that people tend to stick with people who live near them and have this we feeling allows elites who own property to control the city in a sense. So, and furthermore, of course there are what he calls symbolic issues. So issues like moral issues, like abortion, or giving money to the poor and education and all these sorts of things, which are not, it would seem, linked to growth. These things exist, but he thinks that these are secondary. And the reason he thinks this is for the reasons I showed above. It seems like even if there's symbolic issues, so say a politician is advancing symbolic issues, they still need money, right? They're still beholden to the, landed people and the business interests with the money. And a perfect example of this is Marion Barry. So you probably don't know much about Marion Barry, maybe just some of the things he was caught for in the 1990s, but he was mayor of DC from 1978 until 92, I think, and then again from 94 to 98, I think. So Marion Barry came in to the office of mayor. He was the second mayor of DC, by the way, and he was seen as this great social activist. So he was seen as he was very involved in the civil rights movement. That's how he became famous. And he was seen as someone who would protect the interests of the poor, especially the poor blacks. And that's who they viewed him as one of their own, and they had been facing racism for many years in DC, and they thought that Marion Barry would and his administration would help them in many ways. And you might think that he intended to do that, certainly, but most people don't realize that he also, one of the main reasons he won DC is that he also had the businesses behind him. So he had I think the most support of all the people competing in the 1978 election for mayor. The most businesses were behind him, which is very strange for someone who says that they're going to, possibly redistribute wealth in certain ways, raise taxes so that they can give things to the poor. But he knew what he was doing, and he knew he needed to get the businesses behind him. He knew he needed their money, and he did that. And many people think that's why he was elected mayor. And so, it's not because he was going to just give, things to the poor. So if you think that's right, then these symbolic issues might be less important. And that seems to, this seems to back up what Malech is saying about where the power comes from in cities. So, generally, so let's think about who does growth benefit, and Malech thinks it's basically a transfer of goods, of many sorts. So there's going to be many sorts of things that are good for people, or goods, from residents of the city, so all the residents of the city, to property owners and business interests. So the property owners and the business interests are the ones getting the money, right? So they're making money from all this economic growth. And because of this, though the people who are in power, the beneficiaries of economic growth, the property owners and the business people, will seek to make more growth. And this will become the dominant end of cities because of this. You'll have this constant cycle. But the main thing here, so why is growth not all it's cracked up to be? You would think that, well, of course the profits are going to maybe property owners and business people, but everyone in the city benefits from growth. This is the standard view of what growth is for, and what it does. But Malech thinks that this is not true. So, as he was saying, it's a transfer of goods. So he thinks that it's transfer of goods from residents to property and business interests. So the residents are worse off. So what happens? Well, when there's growth, he thinks there's a few things. There's actually higher taxes because the old infrastructure of the city is strained by growth. And this is true. So when you have rapid growth, there's more traffic, there's more need for certain institutions to monitor it. There's more need for power and garbage collection, and all these things leads to higher taxes. And many property owners will experience an increase in the property value, which will also have, force them to pay higher taxes. And if they do not intend to leave the city, this won't benefit them much. A higher appraisal rate on your property only matters to you if you're going to sell your property. And so, and yet you're forced to pay more taxes. So that's problematic for you. And he also thinks, growth causes pollution. And so we can think about the old industrial city and what growth means there. And this is obviously true there. Growth seems to be messy in that respect. So, somewhat more controversial is the claim that the unemployment rate doesn't actually change when there's growth. So the common notion is that, well, yes, you might have these problems in the city with growth, but there's more jobs. There's more economic opportunity for the residents in the city. But what Malich thinks is the rate of unemployment will stay the same generally in cities, and he gives some examples showing this is true. And what he thinks is that, well, population fluctuates with job availability. And so, he thinks there's going to be an equilibrium of unemployment rate, and if jobs leave the city, so will population. And so those who remain will live in similar, they'll have similar job opportunities. If there's an increase in population, or an increase in growth rather, there'll be an increase in population, and so the rate will stay the same. The chances of a person living in the city won't be any better because there's these newcomers coming in to get the jobs, right? And he also thinks, and this contradicts something that, especially conservative economists, but almost all economists thinks, that economic growth, the economy is not a zero-sum game. So when you say, well, I don't like that there's rich people over there who've done things to earn money, one reason you shouldn't say that, if people say, well, it's like they've taken something from me, they have that, I don't, is that economics is not a zero-sum game. So, meaning it's not like there's a sort of fixed pot of money and we give it to certain people. Rather, we can create more money, right? And not, more value in things. We can do productive things. And when we do that, things become more valuable. And it's not that we just have to distribute a fixed amount of things to people. And then inequality seems, wrong. But if the person who has more actually made that, and, you didn't, then it seems like, you don't have any claim on them. But Malich thinks that in cities, in between cities, economic growth is zero-sum. So what he thinks is that, okay, there's economic growth within a country. And you might think that between countries it's not zero-sum. So a country can produce a certain amount, and even if, another country is producing more than them, it's not like this country, the original country is losing out of anything if another country is producing more, right? So it's not zero-sum. But he thinks that jobs generally are just distributed between cities. So say you have, one city and it has a factory in it. It's not like the city itself creates those jobs. Well, the factory's there. And if the factory leaves the city and goes to another city, it's not like the city that got the factory created those jobs. It's just it just got distributed differently. And so, he just thinks that, well, there's this growth within cities that benefits the elites, but it's not like those elites sort of built it up. It came from somewhere else, and those other people were, had to move or whatnot to find new jobs. And so because of this, when a city seems to be growing and producing more jobs, it's not actually producing more jobs, he thinks. It's just taking them from some other place, and then that place, people from that place will have to move somewhere else. So that's what sort of serves as the basis of this view that growth, need not be good, because these jobs simply are not being created. They're just being distributed. And you can see how this would be controversial. I mean, but think about it for a while and think if you think that's right. Because it seems like, for instance, when a city lowers its taxes, it's not like the lower taxes always make jobs. It seems more like, well, they're trying to lure a factory from another city there. That's sort of a standard thing to do. And so in that case, then you might be right. Then it might be zero sum. So that's the general view. What he concludes is that, well, growth is not good for residents generally. So it's good for elites. But if we're concerned about what's good for residents, people who actually were living in the city, we need to consider some other, method of guiding the city, making decisions. Just so in conclusion, many cities have taken this to heart. So this is back in '76, I think, and generally we recognize that there are drawbacks to growth, and that a lot of things we think of as growth are merely redistributing jobs. And so we see that many cities think that, well, quality of life is important. So both growth and quality of life is important. So you can't just trade all your quality of life in, get growth, and be great. It seems that what you're really looking for is to use growth to advance quality of life. That seems a very common view now in cities, or at least what we're seeking. Mullich might say, yeah, that's what the elites claim. That's what they talk about, but they're just deceiving the voters to think that that's what they're really concerned with. Because the voters are now, they now realize the drawbacks of growth, so maybe the story needs to change, which is, it's possible, but might be a bit far-fetched. So, there are certain ways in which economic growth and activity is linked with quality of life, because we see that when the population of a city decreases. So say, a city said, well, we don't care about growth anymore, and another city did, and jobs move from that city to another, and then population moves from that city to the other with more jobs. It seems like the shedding population is bad in itself. Just look at Detroit. When they shed massive amounts of their population, and that has been terrible for just the stability of the community, the ability of the city to do certain things, just the environment that it is. And so you could think that if a city would actually resist the urge to grow, it just might be outcompeted by other cities, and that'd be bad for that city. So, you can also think that, economic activity and economic growth is usually based upon the value of what's being done. So, generally, sort of dirty industry, a factory in say, Ohio or something, is less value economic activity than Silicon Valley or something. What's going on there. What's going on there is, in Silicon Valley, is it's not dirty. It's very clean. It doesn't tax the city very much, and it produces a lot of money, or it brings a lot of money into the city. You have engineers and executives and all those making six figures, whereas in the dirty industry, in Ohio or some other, I'm just picking on Ohio, but some other place, which might have factories, that's just sort of middle of the road wages that they get there, and so the trade-off for growth will not be as good there. So and it'll also be more taxing given the pollution and and other problems. And so you might think there's these preferred types of economic activity which cities should be trying to lure in. And you do see this. So a lot of cities want to be a high-tech place. They don't want this sort of old, dirty industry. They want the latest and greatest because they think this brings in the most money. And they are probably right. So that's something to think about. That that might be a solution to this. That you can grow in ways, or you can improve economic activity in ways that is that is not bad for current residents. You still might have problems of increasing property taxes and such, but you don't have the really bad externalities of growth in an industrial city. But you might have others. You'll still have traffic. You'll still have things like that. But you might think that the benefits of this growth outweigh those things. So also, it seems like a lot of the design methods we talk about are meant to increase growth in some way, at least to manage growth. So for instance, Jacobs, wants to create a vibrant community that is economically viable. So she thinks that, there's certain types of growth which can destroy a community and make it not economically stable. So she's concerned with economic stability, and this will allow growth. So it seems like what they're really concerned with is how good the community serves its members. But growth is required oftentimes to achieve that end. So the end itself, as we were talking about this end before, is quality of life. But sort of managed growth is important, and you can't stifle growth too much. You can't just say, we don't care about growth at all, it doesn't matter at all, because that might sort of destroy your city. And so growth does seem important. Okay, so that was a short lecture. I just wanted to cover some things about this article because it's sort of important and can it's a bit difficult. Make sure to read through it again. He does a lot of good things there, and it's a very good article. But I hope this helps a little bit. And if you have any questions, let me know. Like if I wasn't clear about something, I can do some more lecturing about this if there's more questions. Okay, so next week we'll do some issues in redistributive justice, or distributive justice, or redistribution of wealth in cities. And we'll be reading excerpts from Rawls's Theory of Justice and Nozick's Anarchy, State, and Utopia. And these you may have read them before, especially if you're a philosophy major. But Rawls is advocating for some sort of requirements for equality, right? So he thinks that there's need to be certain institutions, the way our institutions are set up need to be such that improvements in the rich only occur when they're accompanied by improvements for the poor. So we can't have a sort of pattern of wealth whereby the rich do better and the poor do worse, or something like that. And then Nozick is a libertarian, and he says no. If you advocate a sort of pattern like that, a pattern of wealth distribution, this will violate liberty. Specifically the liberty of the richer people, because you're taking from them essentially and giving to the poor. So that'll be, and so Rawls wrote first in I think like 1971, and then Nozick wrote later, and Nozick is writing in response to Rawls. So it's a very good sort of little debate there. And then we'll look at public and affordable housing, and just how we can justify that, and just some examples of that in Baltimore and hopefully DC. Baltimore will be easier. And then finally we'll talk about mass transit as a form of redistribution. So you might think the mass transit sets up the basic equality of opportunity, because given the necessity of someone to move about a city, having public transit, public mass transit, gives that person the ability to move and get a job and do basically participate in the market. and we might think that's a basic right or something of someone that we can derive from, what Rawls says. So we'll have to talk about that. So finally, there'll be a take-home midterm exam due Sunday, not this Sunday, but Sunday, June 17th, and I will distribute that on Wednesday. So it'll be some essay questions, and I mean they'll be meant to challenge you to think about these issues, because it's open book, so I'm not just gonna ask you these sort of simple questions, and I'll give you more details later. So you should have a bit of time to do it, but I hope it'll make you engage with the material. Okay, so I have already put up the Rawls and Nozick articles on ELMS, and I've also linked to a Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article, which you should read, about distributive justice. This will give you sort of a feel of what philosophers have thought about this. So next week will be pretty much mostly philosophy. The stuff on housing and transit will be shorter, and I'll probably just mostly lecture on it. So I want you to really read Rawls and Nozick carefully and try to understand it. And so we'll spend some time on that. Okay, so I'll see you later.